Good afternoon to everyone. So today I'm going to talk about psychedelics and hallucinogens in PTSD. It's a great pleasure for me to be here in Italia. So a brief overview of my presentation. So I will introduce PTSD. Well, there's no need because the presenters before me have done that, and I will talk a little bit about the history of psychedelics, what are the key compounds that have been studied, what are their mechanisms of action, what is the clinical evidence for each one of them for PTSD. I will talk a little bit about some safety and ethical considerations and what are the future directions and research gaps. So we heard about post-traumatic stress disorder before. I'm not going into the symptoms. We have been discussing the symptoms of this disorder. And there are already a bunch of standard treatments that have been approved. They seem to have some effect on most of our patients. But what we do know is that a big percentage of them, about 40 to 60%, do not respond to these traditional treatments, and some of them continue to have symptomatology. It's also very difficult for many of them to engage in trauma-focused psychotherapy, and many of them still have extreme difficulties dealing with dysregulation associated with the recall of traumatic events. So dropout rates are very high in most typical treatments. So this leads us to my talk, which is we do need new and effective treatments for these patients. So I'll start introducing a little bit of the neurobiology of PTSD. From animal models, from patients, we have seen that there are some brain areas involved, and we have found that there is, in most patients, an hyperactivation of the amygdala, a decreased connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, and there is an increased connectivity between amygdala, hippocampus, hypothalamus, and brainstem, which is associated with hyperarousal, a decreased activity in the default mode network, and a decreased activity of the central executive network, and this is related to rigid cognitive patterns of these patients. So there have been, in the last few years, increasing interest in these compounds, but their exploration started in the 50s and the 70s. So there were some initial experiments, but there are many concerns at this point, and especially due to the potential of abuse and eventual side effects. So they were banned in the 70s in most countries. And they only entered medicine again in the beginning of this millennium, with many papers being published, especially in the last few years. And today, I'm going to talk of these 5 specific compounds that seems to be those that have more research at this point. So I'll talk about psilocybin, LSD, DMT, ayahuasca, which are considered classical psychedelics, and also the non-classic psychedelics, MDMA and ketamine. So this is a scheme that aims to show some of the signaling cascades involved in the action of these compounds. Also some hormonal modulation that is linked to some behavioral outcomes associated with these drugs. And I'm not going into detail, but I'm going to talk after about each the action of each group of these compounds. But they might have effects, especially on monoamines, especially on serotonin, but also on neuroplasticity and the increase of sociability, and also affect other amines besides serotonin. So just for you to have an idea, in most studies, the administration of these compounds required pre-sessions and post-sessions. So they vary between studies, and also the number of experimental sessions in which the drug is given also varies. But normally there are some sessions preparing the patient and some sessions debriefing. But also during the experiment, the patient is with the therapist. So there is, normally this is made with psychotherapy. So MDMA is considered to increase serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. This could enhance mood and emotional regulation. It elevates oxytocin, facilitating trust and reducing fear response. It reduces amygdala and insula activity, which are linked to fear, so it would diminish threat responses to traumatic events. It also enhances connectivity between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, and this could help reintegrating these memories. And it also facilitates memory reconsolidation. So this is one of the studies that have been done with MDMA, and this study shows that although it does not directly evaluate the effect of MDMA on PTSD, it evaluates some of the components of PTSD or some of the symptoms, and it shows that MDMA increases self-compassion. It aims with affect dysregulation and instability, and it also helps with interpersonal conflict. So there's a range of symptoms that seem to improve after giving MDMA. There have been some phase 2 and phase 3 trials. This is one of the phase 3 trials. They have been done by the same group, and they were required by FDA for the approval of the drug. And in fact, both, and I brought the latest one from 2023, they both showed a significant reduction of PTSD symptoms. And it also showed that the drug was generally safe and well tolerated. But as you can see, the small is relatively small for a phase 3 trial. And this is also a study. In fact, this is a systematic review with meta-analysis showing that MDMA was effective in diminishing all scores of PTSD, and it was generally well tolerated. So it kind of reinforces what the previous study have shown. But the fact is that despite FDA granted MDMA as a breakthrough therapy in PTSD in 2017, in 2024, the FDA advisory panel voted against its approval. So there were some concerns, and some of the previous studies were retracted due to concerns with inappropriate relationships between therapists and patients. And also they thought that this phase 3 trial had some problems with data and does not provide long-term safety data. And they consider that to be approved, we need further studies. And in fact, Lykos, which is the pharmaceutical company that is trying to get to approval, is now preparing a third study, although the protocol is not prepared yet or published yet. But, well, we hope to have soon some more data on this. So another non-classic psychedelic is ketamine. Well, ketamine have been very well studied now for many different therapeutic options or applications, and PTSD is one of them. So it should act in very different ways. It is considered as an NMDA receptor antagonist. It is considered, which could increase glutamate and synaptogenesis. This has been proved with ketamine. It restores prefrontal cortex connectivity, so it could counters trauma-induced neurodegeneration. It alters the default mode network activity, and also its dissociative effects could contribute to forming new emotional perspectives. So in a way, it could balance the dysfunction that we found in PTSD patients. Ketamine has shown rapid antidepressant effects, and it also showed PTSD symptom relief. And I will show you some of the studies that have been made with the esketamine. It was approved by the FDA, and esketamine is already approved for treatment-resistant depression, but there is still research ongoing for PTSD. So this is one of the studies. This is from 2014 with 40 patients, and it shows that an infusion of ketamine was associated with significant and rapid reduction of PTSD. So as we have seen in depression, it also seems to act quickly in PTSD. And it shows, this study also showed that it was generally well tolerated. This is another study with a bigger sample. It has 1,034 patients, and it also showed a significant improvement of PTSD symptoms. This was a study done with people with comorbid depression, but they studied PTSD in those patients as well. So this is an open-label pilot study with only 22 people studying the effect of low dose of oral ketamine, which is much easier to administrate to patients. And it shows that the PTSD checklist 5 was significantly reduced. So it was effective even in a low dose and oral administration. And this is also an interesting study. So it has a big sample, and they compared people who made psychotherapy along with ketamine administration with people only doing ketamine. And it showed improvement in both groups. So this is interesting because the authors concluded that maybe ketamine can act without a psychotherapy. So this is also another study with ketamine for chronic PTSD. And it showed that PTSD improved. There was, in fact, a large magnitude of effect, and response was also rapid and durable, which is also interesting. So going from the non-classic to the classic psychedelics, as a group, they have some common effects, and they show serotonin agonism, particularly on the 5-HT2A receptor agonists. So it promotes neuroplasticity, and as well as reduction of depression and anxiety, the reduction of the default mode network activity, promoting flexible cognitive processing. It increases the expression of BDNF, and this might support neurogenesis. It reduces amygdala reactivity to emotional negative stimuli, and it also has been linked to some psychological effects. So many of the studies done with this drug showed that there was a heightened emotional openness and introspection and the facilitation of the therapeutic alliance and empathy. So it has been studied to facilitate the psychotherapeutic process, which we know is very difficult for these patients. So it has been studied for depression and anxiety, especially in terminal illness contexts, and FDA considered it a breakthrough therapy in treatment-resistant depression in 2019, but there are no major trials in PTSD done yet. In fact, this is, in this square, I'm showing you some of the studies that which protocols were published. Some of them are recruiting, others are not, but we don't have finished trials yet. But we do have a lot of data, for example, from animal studies showing, for example, in this case, that one administration of psilocybin could facilitate fear extinction. So we do have some data in animals, but we do also have some data on humans. And this is a study made in HIV patients. This was also a quite large sample. And what it shows is that administering psilocybin to these patients reduced demoralization, but it also showed that patients with PTSD had an improvement in their symptoms. And we do know that this population is particularly affected by PTSD due to adverse and traumatic experiences. There are some studies made in veterans and in depression with people who had comorbid PTSD. And in fact, these two studies have shown an improvement of depression, but not on PTSD. So I brought this because this is some negative data that is published. But what they saw is that either having PTSD did not prevent the effect of psilocybin on depression, or another study showed that people with PTSD tend to respond less to psilocybin if they have depression. So perhaps we are facing different subtypes of patients here. Well, and we would expect some benefit because there are some symptoms that overlap between these big syndromes. MDD and PTSD have a lot of common symptoms. So maybe if we do have an improvement in depression, we should have an improvement in PTSD, but we have not shown that yet. So LSD is not well studied. It has been proposed. I found only one study in which the researchers did administered MDMA and then LSD to a group of 50 patients, and they saw an improvement by clinical judgment. This is not much, but well, it showed improvement. Ayahuasca has also been studied. There is still no specific clinical trial. There is some data on anxiety and depression, and this is a study that recruited people who made ayahuasca in ceremonies. So it was not accessing PTSD specifically, but what they were studying was the re-experiencing of adverse life events under ayahuasca. And what they saw is that when people with traumatic experiences or PTSD did the substance, they were re-experiencing these traumatic events but this was associated with cognitive reappraisal, psychological flexibility, and those who were re-experiencing these traumatic events after the session exhibit greater reduction in neuroticism. So they concluded that the substance itself has brought some positive effects, although people re-experiencing these traumatic events felt discomfort during the sessions, which we understand. Considering the security of classic psychedelics, this is a large systematic review published on JAMA in 2024, so it's really recent. And what it showed is that classic psychedelics are generally safe, but safe in clinical or research environments. That's what we know. So this is an example of an NGO doing research. There are many associations like this doing research on these compounds in different settings and in different countries. In fact, this one was developed or created by a veteran who made ayahuasca and then recovered and started this project to help others. So in controlled settings and in research settings, most of the substances, or the majority of them, seem to have reduced risks. They seem to be relatively safe. But there are some potential adverse effects, particularly in vulnerable individuals, and we do know that this type of secondary effects happen a lot outside research context. So when we select someone to participate in a study, they are really well selected, so they have lower risks. It's hard to know what would happen if we administered the substances outside this research context. So we do need bigger and more diverse samples to know more about this. We also have had some difficulties, and for example, in Portugal, difficulties with informed consent. It's sometimes difficult to inform fully the patients about what can happen when we administer these substances. There is also the possibility that there is some trauma sensitivity and cultural considerations that should be done. We know that in some countries, it has been easier than in others. For example, this is taken from Australia, and in Australia and New Zealand, they are doing a lot of research at the moment. There are a number of trials going on different types of disorders, and they are recruiting the population directly. They have sites, so it's easy for someone who wants to get in a trial to contact them and get into a trial. But there are still concerns even there about the use of these substances. So some future directions, we should, as I said before, do larger multi-site clinical trials, maybe think that this type of approach should be personalized. So while some patients seem to have a positive, rapid response, a full response, others develop secondary symptoms or psychotic symptoms, for example. And we do not really know why that happens in some of our patients. And perhaps we need to know better in which type of persons this might be useful and when it's not useful. So we also need to know more about long-term outcomes and neurobiological mechanisms and how we should integrate this with psychotherapeutic models. So this is my talk for today. I brought some images of Lisbon. Thank you very much.